Duck Series Studios presents a review by Connor. Here is season 23, episodes 13 through 18. I almost started with the wrong one. Seeing is Believing. This is written by Andrew Brenner, and this episode is awesome. So Merlin comes to Sodor, and Cranky's like, how can a steam engine make himself invisible? Invisibility on! And Thomas sees him, Rebecca sees him, James saw him in JBS. Gordon, I think, saw him, I don't know. Nia saw him. And, but Percy didn't. So Percy says, I want to see the invisible engine. And then, Trevor's in it, and he has a new steam whistle. And then Percy comes and he sees Merlin, and he says, that must be Merlin, the invisible engine. Oh, hello, Merlin. Nice to see you again, Trevor says. Really great episode. I love the plot. I love seeing Merlin again because he's one of my favorite characters, actually, believe it or not. He is one of my favorites. I like seeing Trevor and Thomas and Cranky and Salty and Rebecca and Percy and all those guys. Episode gets a 10 out of 10. Here it says and. So there's Philip and James, and it says Philip. So it's Apology Impossible. On the Thomas Wikia, when they had a poll for Best Sodor episode, this episode got like the least votes. And I can't see why. James is perfectly in character. He's being a jerk. And that's what I love about this episode. And as well, I went through something very similar to what Philip went through, except what I went through was more like Diesel's devious deed, and someone was telling lies about me. But, so I just for some reason, I think it's because of that I have a fondness for this episode, like a real fondness for this episode. I quite like it. So, Philip is at Brendan Docks, and then James puffs in and knocks over oil cans, and just a tiny bit gets on Philip, and then a lot of bit gets on Philip, and then a tiny bit gets on James, and then James says, what did you do that for? I didn't do anything. It was you, and you should apologize. Fine. I'm sorry for messing you up. My beautiful, splendid paintwork. To me, not your paintwork. And then James goes in the washdown, and butts in front of Philip and says, here's James. James, go back. But that would be like saying sorry for being bigger, stronger, and far more splendid than you are. And then James blocks the bridge, and only one side engines can only go one side of the bridge. And he blocks it for Philip, and then Paxton, Rebecca, and Thomas get stuck behind, and Philip backs up to be the bigger engine. And then Sir Topham Hatt makes James pull trucks of rubbish, because Thomas says in a James impression that he'd love to. Great episode, 8 out of 10. The Water Wheel. A bad episode. It's completely unrealistic. Bamboo isn't that bouncy. It goes like boing. So Thomas is in China, and he has to take a water wheel made of bamboo. And here are some flaws. The fantasy sequence is terrible. It is a terrible fantasy sequence. Because Thomas is made of bamboo and he's brown. Thomas says, blue is the only proper color for an engine. But he's happy. He should be sad that he's brown. And then he just goes in the water. Why can't we have realistic fantasy sequences? Because seriously, locomotives should have at least maybe 70%, 80% realistic fantasy sequence. Like the episodes that do it right are Hunt the Truck, which has a realistic fantasy sequence, which I'll review later, and Thomas in the Wild, which has, because Thomas is told it's a big, giant black and white teddy bear, and he imagines a big, giant black and white teddy bear. So this fantasy sequence was terrible. This episode was terrible because the water wheel escapes and it just bounces. Like, it bounces higher than the trees, and I drew it next to some clouds, and it even goes almost that high. It's like really high, and it's like boing, 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 boing. And then, yeah. And then it just floats to where they need it. It's really bad episode. 3 out of 10. I think they might have been going for something like Rusty and the Boulder, but that episode's way better than this episode. I actually like Rusty the Boulder, and I actually found it believable up until I realized it couldn't happen. This I don't find believable at all. Like, I honestly don't. And as well, I even, like, I actually said to people, I don't think Bamboo can be that bouncy when I talked to them about this episode. And it can't. It can't do this. And I heard other people's reviews, they have the same complaint. Next episode. Samson and the Fireworks. Here's Samson. There's a bunch of fog. Good episode. So Samson is afraid of fireworks. And we get the return of Cyril. Of all characters, it's a very random one to bring back Cyril. And they made him more comedic because he just goes into the fog and he says, "When you hear a bang, you better be careful, because there's a signal ahead." And then he just vanishes into the fog, and Sir Topham Hatt's like, "Thank you, Cyril." And that part is funny. Well, maybe. And, really, it's a good episode. Samson's afraid of the fireworks. He doesn't get warned. Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle get warned, but not Samson. So he thinks they're fireworks when he goes over to Cyril's fog detonators. And is afraid and gets lost. Great episode. Nice to see Sodor friends. Samson's not from Sodor, but nice to see Samson, and nice to see Thomas and Annie, Clarabelle. Nice to return of Cyril. Nice seeing all these classic and modern Thomas characters. This episode gets an 8 out of 10. Runaway car or runaway truck. This episode is good. So Lay, and again, this is a problem with the new characters. They don't have much personality. Like, the only ones that really do in season 22, Big World Big Adventures, are Ace and Rebecca. The others just don't. Lay just doesn't want to crash again. He derails. Thomas stops him, and then Lay derails. Young Bao comes and helps Thomas learn the right way to stop a runaway car. And then Lay runs away, and then Thomas has to stop him. "Young Bao, what shall I do?" "Go, Thomas, you must rescue him." And he does. The fantasy sequence is terrible. It's unrealistic. Again, we should have more realistic fantasy sequences. Thomas, jumps, and he's, literally jumps, and he's like, oh, I do not like the fantasy sequence in this one. Yeah, I'd probably give this one a 7 out of 10, maybe an 8. What does it deserve? 7.5. Let's see. Actually, no, 7. I think it deserves a 7. I take that back. 7.5, 8, no, 7. Minimum of good. So here is a flop in my drawing. It says, "Stop peck." I was gonna put, Stop pecking my paintwork, you oversized chicken." That's a funny part. Thomas's animal arc is really good. It's pretty good, anyway. So it's really funny. That's probably one of the best ways to describe it. So Headkeeper Jack at the Sutter Animal Park, the boiler in the animal park is broken down. Emily goes to Brenda Dawson's, finds out that the boiler, Thomas and Emily find out that it won't be here till after Christmas. Thomas says, "Those animals need to be kept warm." And then he goes and he collects the animals. And there's this really funny scene with Henry and Sir Topham Hatt. And he says, oh, and that's Tidmouth Sheds, by the way. Part of it, zoomed in on James's birth. "What's the warmest place on Sodor?" "The Steamworks is pretty hot, sir." "Quiet, Henry, I'm trying to think." "I know! The Steamworks!" The steamworks is pretty hot. This is hilarious. And then Thomas takes them, but he couldn't get them to the steamworks. And then he takes them to the sheds. Percy is really happy. So is Nia and Rebecca, but Gordon and James aren't. And then there's this funny part. James says, "Stop packing my paintwork, you oversized chicken." Nia says, "It's an ostrich, James." And then the next day, the ostrich lays an egg, and headkeeper Jack tells James it must stay there, and James says, "What? Now I'm babysitting birds? No!" And then the ending's funny because the egg hatches and it just turns. Yeah, it's really funny. Really good episode. 8 out of 10.